Palestinians were able to mount, or Hamas was able to mount, such an attack and basically succeed in destroying Israeli intelligence and inflicting heavy casualties on the supposedly the crackest of all crack units, that were actually in their command and control centers. The fact that they were able to do that, Israel was determined, and the U.S. was determined, and the colonial Europeans were also determined that this should not be a lesson for any Arab or any third world, anyone from the global south, that they can do this. So they want to make sure that the punishment is far outweigh anything that they deem reasonable. The loss of one Palestinian to me is one too many. But they feel that they will continue to do this because there are lessons to be drawn. If the Palestinians can do this, and the Lebanese can do this, and the people in the West Bank can do this, and the Gaza can do this, this whole colonial project will come crumbling down.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is Dispatches. The corporate media complicity during the genocide in Gaza has been shameful, to say the least. All the major networks and papers act as stenographers for the State Department and White House and the Israeli army. They almost never challenge the genocidal spin pushed out by U.S. regime and Israeli regime spokespeople. But there are some reporters who've maintained their integrity. Rather than accept the lies spewed about human shields and Israel's right to defend itself by people like John Kirby and Matt Miller, there are still some great journalists out there challenging them on their BS. Today, I'm joined by one of these brave journalists, Said Arikat, who holds the Biden administration's feet to the fire on the regular. Said is a Palestinian journalist and the Washington bureau chief for the outlet Al-Quds Daily. But before we jump into it, this is just the first part of this episode. The full episode is available to Breakthrough News members only. You can become a member at patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And as always, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell so you get a notification whenever we post new content. And if you appreciate this show, you can also donate below on YouTube. Said, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rania. It's great to be with you.
It's so great to have you on. And, I've been watching, as I'm sure many people who are watching this video have also been watching you hold the Biden administration's feet to the fire by finding the will to go to these press briefings regularly and ask them the hard questions that very few other journalists are willing to ask. And I want to get into some of that. But before we do, I wanted to get your comment on one thing in particular, and that is this statement that was released by the White House. It was a statement marking 100 days of the genocide in Gaza. But of course, it's titled, for those who are just listening, the statement is titled, Statement from President Joe Biden Marking 100 Days of Captivity for Hostages in Gaza. I'm not going to go through this statement because it's not worth reading, but it's really disgusting. It basically talks only about the Israelis that are being held in Gaza and says nothing about at this point, I think it's probably like hit 30,000 Palestinians who've been killed by Israel in the last less than 4 months at this point. Not a word about those deaths, those murders. So, Said, as somebody who's regularly hearing statements from the spokespeople for this administration, what were your initial thoughts when you saw this statement from the White House?
Thank you, Rania. Great question. I actually posed this very question today to the spokesman of the State Department because there was an interview that Thomas Friedman of the New York Times conducted with Blinken in Davos, and he asked him whether Palestinian lives were as worthy as Jewish lives, to which he said, yes, or there is no, they don't matter. Jewish lives do not matter more. I think that was the answer. So I asked the spokesperson, how do you square this against a statement issued by the president a couple of days ago, referring to the statement that you have posted? And, of course, Blinken also issued a very similar statement, Rania. So none of the statement mentioned the Palestinians in any way. He, of course, danced around the question. He says you can't judge by one statement or two statements. But it truly is astounding. The statement itself, the fact that it ignores about 100,000 Palestinians dead, missing, and injured. Let alone the hundreds of a couple million people, displaced and so on, is really a new low for this administration. It is has completely abdicated, whatever moral ground it had before or claimed to have before. It doesn't even care anymore. Simply saying that Palestinian lives don't matter, no matter what they say. The fact of the matter is that this administration that has so, brutally and consistently supplied Israel not only with the arms and the munitions and so on, but also with the political cover to go on and do what they have been doing since October 7 and October 8. So the statement itself is, a new low. I mean, it's shameful, of course, or maybe shameless, but they didn't even come out and say, we want to rectify this. We will issue a statement on the horrendous loss of life among Palestinians or what is happening to them. But in fact, they have not done anything since then. But they've had many opportunities to respond to this issue, and basically they declined to do it.
It is really stunning. And I wanted to ask you in particular a question about journalists. I mean, you're a Palestinian journalist and you're watching your colleagues be hunted down, killed, having their families killed in Gaza. I think at this point, it might be more. Last I saw, it was 111 journalists have been killed in Gaza.
No.
And it's just utterly shocking and disgusting. And, there was this video after the killing of I believe it was Wael al-Dahdou's
family,
his son,
right?
Also a journalist, Hamza, who was killed. Yeah. And there was a statement put to Anthony Blinken about this, and he was essentially, he was asked to comment on it, and here's his response. I'm just going to play it real quick because I want to play his response. I want to get your response to his response.
I am deeply, deeply sorry for the almost unimaginable loss suffered by your colleague, Al-Dadu. I'm a parent myself. I can't begin to imagine the horror that he's experienced, not once, but now twice.
Mm-hmm.
It's unimaginable tragedy.
Talk to me about how it's been the last few months watching these journalists be targeted and killed by the Israelis.
It is horrifying because, these are the people that basically tell us what's going on. Israel prevents any journalist from going in. There's a complete, discharging of duties, if you want to call it, by the Western press. We have not seen them try. I think there was an attempt by one CNN journalist, Molly, I can't remember her last name, and so on. She went in and she reported from there. But of course, she was accompanied by Israelis, and she was embedded with them. So it is horrifying. And I will tell you what is even more, heart-rending is the fact that they don't even mention the bloggers or the freelancers and so on. So probably the numbers are staggering. The numbers are staggering. So, and this administration, the U.S. administration today, Miller was asked about the journalists, and he said there are some 73 journalists killed, as if this really makes it, okay, and not the 117 or 113 journalists that have been killed or are now to have been killed. I don't want to comment really on Blinken's comment. He made it in Qatar, Doha. We know that back in October, the Axios, Barak Ravid wrote about a meeting that Blinken had with Jewish Americans. He also had on that day a meeting with Arab Americans, and in his meetings with the Jewish Americans, he assured them that he spoke to the Emir of Qatar to tone down Al Jazeera rhetoric. And lo and behold, a couple of days later, we saw the targeting of the Dahdouh family. I'm not drawing any connection, nor am I insinuating in one way, shape, or form. But I'm saying that this administration definitely has not been sincere about Palestinian journalists. It has made a great deal of fuss in the past about journalists in other conflict zones like Ukraine, other places, and so on. So, that's a thing. But on the Palestinian, I asked a question on January 2nd. The last time we had a briefing was January 2nd, and I asked about the targeting of Palestinian journalists, and he said they have no evidence that Israel targets Palestinian journalists or does it on purpose with intent. They always have this caveat that Israel does not intend to kill either civilians or journalists or medical staff or doctors or target hospitals.
All just one big accident. It's amazing the level of denial. I mean, the Israelis will literally, they could come on and admit to all of it. They do admit to a lot of what they're doing, and you'll still have these spokespeople denying it. I wanted to ask you, Said, I mean, you, just as I have, I mean, we spent all our lives watching Israel be incredibly brutal towards Palestinians, towards the rest of its neighbors. It's not surprising, right, that Israel kills, bombs, targets civilians. We've seen this, right, for a long time. This is what Israel has done since its founding. But there is something, I think, uniquely disturbing about the scale of this violence. We've seen this, but not on this scale, right? I've never seen, for example, the systematic targeting of hospitals and the killing of all the doctors, or taking them, hostage, or, just wiping out entire, not just one residential blocks, but the entire neighborhood, right? It's just to such an extreme degree, and the open incitement to genocide. So I guess I raise all that to ask you, from when this started to now, from October 7th to now, have you been surprised? Has this shocked you? What are your thoughts on how far the Israelis have gone? And has there been maybe an evolution in your level of shock from October 7th to now?
Well, as you said, Israel has always practiced genocide and the killing of Palestinians and destroying their homes and their roads and so on. But you are right. I mean, not this, it shatters the soul, staggers the soul, really, this level of huge and staggering bombardment of civilian areas, because as you mentioned in the past, everybody mentioned that Gaza is one of the most densely populated places on earth. Wherever you hit, you're going to hit civilians. I mean, it's under the pretext of human shields or whatever they call it, that Hamas is using these places to hide in and so on, which there was no evidence thus far. There's been no evidence of doing that. The truth of the matter is that the level of brutality is unmatched in the past with the intensity of it. In fact, the Pentagon itself said that at this rate, if we don't keep supplying Israel, it would run out of munitions in 3 or 4 days. So that shows you the amount of munitions that is being, that Gaza is being bombarded with day in and day out. And this, of course, comes from the United States of America. Almost 100% of the munitions that Israel is using is it's American-made and American supplied. This administration twice thus far, in 1 month actually, in the month of December, twice they bypassed Congress to send ammunition to Israel and to send arms and so on, which is something that it has to do, but it did not. It used its stockpiles because they do have prepositioned stockpiles, including in Israel. They use those to make sure that Israel can continue with its this onslaught. And there are a number of reasons for that, in my opinion. I mean, some of them are the fact that the Palestinians were able to mount, or Hamas was able to mount, such an attack and basically succeed in destroying Israeli intelligence and inflicting heavy casualties on the supposedly the crackest of all crack units, that were actually in their command and control centers. The fact that they were able to do that, Israel was determined, and the U.S. was determined, and the Europeans, the colonial Europeans, were also determined that this should not be a lesson for any Arab or any third world, anyone from the global south, that they can do this. So they want to make sure that the punishment is far, far outweigh anything that they deem reasonable. I mean, the loss of one Palestinian to me is one too many. But they feel that they will continue to do this because there are lessons to be drawn. If the Palestinians can do this, and the Lebanese can do this, and the people in the West Bank can do this, and the Gaza can do this, this whole colonial project will come crumbling down. And in fact, for a moment or two, it has crumbled down. That's why we saw the dispatching of huge naval forces and so on. The USS Ford, the Ford, which is the biggest and largest and most wondrous aircraft carrier in the world, that has a task force of 12 other ships. They send in amphibious ships with Marines. They send in the USS Eisenhower. We saw all this because they felt, oh my God, look at this. That's good because they're coming apart. So that is one of the reasons. And the other reason is Israel sees there may be an opportunity in this, that you can create another Nakba and drive the Palestinians out of Gaza and move them once and for all. And we have seen this actually made in one statement after the other, but by many Israeli officials, including the Prime Minister of Israel himself, including the Defense Minister of Israel, Gallant, including people in the opposition, Benny Gantz and others, or Lapid. I mean, all of them, all across what claimed to be the political spectrum. There's really no daylight between the different groups, whether there is a liberal or right-wing extremists and so on. So we saw all these statements. They point to one thing, that Israel sees an opportunity to basically liquidate the Palestinian cause, and liquidate it once and for all, and destroy it, and drive the Palestinians out, drive them to Gaza, drive them to Sinai, drive them elsewhere. And this is still ongoing, by the way. I mean, this is, they tell people go to this place, and then they bomb it. Obviously, the intent is to kill as many Palestinians as possible.
Yeah, there's no question about that. That was so well put about like the reason the U.S. is investing so much in this, and obviously, it's so ridiculous because the Israelis, I think, have bitten off way more than they can chew. They've been at this for almost 4 months, and they have failed to achieve their military objectives. They keep claiming that they've achieved them, but then they'll say, "Oh yes, we've secured the north of Gaza," and then Hamas launches rockets from the north of Gaza. So no, you have not secured the north of Gaza. But I want to go back to what you were saying about the U.S. for a moment, because I asked you if you're surprised by how far the Israelis have gone. And it sounds like you're, and it sounds like yes, you are, but you're not. Basically, right. I think that's where we all are. But what about the U.S.? I mean, given how you just very, very beautifully explained why the U.S. and the Europeans are backing this. Are you surprised? And maybe, you know what, let me wait before I let you answer that, because I do want to play just a couple of short clips from some of the questions that you've put to the spokespeople for the White House and the State Department. And I'm sure a lot of people have probably seen some of these clips. You're really doing God's work by going there, because you're one of such, like, there's nobody else really challenging these people. They just accept what's lied about as fact. So here's you and right. I believe this is Matt Miller, right? Matt Miller, who I don't know how this man goes to sleep at night, because he literally spends his day defending the murder of children. But in this particular exchange back in early December, you asked about the situation with babies in incubators. And let me just remind people, this was the phase of the genocide, where the Israelis were surrounding and putting under siege all of these hospitals in northern and central Gaza. And there were the NICU units, the neonatal units, where babies were in incubators, these premature babies who many women had to deliver through C-sections because it was premature labor, because of the situation they were in. They were so stressed, and their bodies were so stressed under the conditions of genocide. They delivered these babies through C-sections without anesthetics in many cases. Think about that. Palestinian women were forced to deliver their premature babies without anesthesia with a C-section. I mean, I just can't wrap my head around that. But moreover, there was an incident at a particular hospital where the Israelis said that they would take care of these premature babies when they forced the staff out and promised them that they would take care of the babies and call the Red Cross, and they didn't. And the babies were left to starve and die. And their bodies, it was 17 days. For 17 days later, their bodies had decomposed, and that's how they were found. I mean, one of the most brutal acts of this entire genocide has been the treatment of Palestinian infants. It's been horrific. So here's you challenging Matt Miller. I'm going to play some of this exchange.
There was a report that
Said.
On this issue, there's a great many rumors and so on that talks about incentivizing Egypt to take hundreds of thousands and so on. So you repudiate that completely. That is not something that has been discussed, as it was allegedly discussed on Capitol Hill.
So I am not going to respond to rumors, and I don't know what you're referring to with respect to Capitol Hill, but it doesn't actually really matter. But I will reiterate the principles that the Secretary outlined, and one of them is no forced displacement of the Palestinian people from Gaza.
Okay. A couple of other issues. There was a report that Israel's assault forced a nurse to leave babies behind. They were found decomposing. Are you aware of the story?
I am aware of that report, Said.
And do you take it as it happened, or if it did happen, is that a war crime?
Said, I would say that is a tragedy. It's a tragedy for those babies.
Right.
It's a tragedy for their family members. Right. It's a tragedy for the Palestinian people, and it is a tragedy for the world.
Okay.
And it is why we have made clear that far too many Palestinians have been killed in this conflict. And that, of course, includes far too many Palestinian children and, of course, Palestinian babies. And it is why we have taken every measure we could to speak loudly and clearly to the government of Israel that it needs to do everything it can to minimize civilian harm. And it's why we have worked to try and move humanitarian assistance in. And it is also why I will say we have said that Hamas should stop hiding its fighters in hospitals.
I'm talking about this particular incident.
I know. It gets to the very difficult nature of this war,
right?
And the immense human tragedy that has been inflicted on far too many people.
But if it happened, it's not a war crime, or is it a war crime?
So I'm never going to be able to make an assessment here. You saw us today make a conclusion about war crimes after a very deliberate fact-finding process where we then apply the fact.
I mean, this guy's unbelievable. I don't know how you maintain your composure. I watch this and I want to jump into the screen and the nicest thing I can say is I want to throw my shoe at him. And that's a very generous. I'm playing down how boiling with rage I was when I saw that. He's not only he's calling it a tragedy. He's calling the murder of babies a tragedy as if they were killed by a tsunami or an earthquake or some natural disaster that was in no one's hands, right? That's how he's making it sound. Not only that, he then blames Hamas for hiding behind baby. What is this? This is ridiculous. It's so absurd. How do you maintain your composure? How do you not start
sometimes I'm yelling and shouting
on
the inside, but I'm maintaining my composure on the outside because I don't want to be thrown out. I want to ask the follow-up question and so on. But you're right. I mean, it is very frustrating. We have to do a job. I mean, in the end, we have a job to do. We have to report on a lot of things that we don't like, but we want to get at the bottom of what is really, what is the policy, where they stand on these issues. It's not only a double standard, but it's, whatever they say is so completely disingenuous. I mean, it's their care and so on for people that always oppose contextualizing. They said, well, but look at Hamas. This war is very complicated and so on. Although this is a clear cut. This is a black and white issue. We have soldiers forcing medical staff out and leaving babies to die and then decompose. That is the case here. Nothing else. We can talk about the war. We can talk about who is to blame and all these things. Of course, my point of view is entirely different, but they can talk all about that. But we are talking about a single incident that was reported, and that was authenticated, not only reported, that the Israelis, pointed their guns at the medical staff, forced them out, and leave these babies to die, whether this is a war crime or not. And I think that, according to U.S. laws and procedures and wars of the laws of war and all these things, this is a clear war crime. But they will not answer it. I think that to listen, whether to the spokesperson in the State Department or the spokespeople in the White House, and to the president himself. I mean, they are always dismissive of Palestinian lives. We know that the president came out early on and touted a debunked story about decapitated babies and so on. Then went on, despite the fact that he repeated it once and twice and three times, despite that the fact that his staff told him not to, and so on. They exaggerated the whatever news item about mass rape and so on, which was never really in any way credibly authenticated. And the president himself, which is really should be beneath the presidency to talk about these issues and so on, but he kept propagating the story and to the point where the Israeli says, "Hey, cool it down." In fact, the Israeli Ministry of Defense says, "Wait a minute now, cool it down a little bit." So we are, I am not fazed at all by where they stand and what they say, because let's face it, Israel is a client state. Israel, people say, the government of the United States like to convey to the world or to its listeners or whatever that Israel is a sovereign state. It's not. It's a client state. It lives on an American umbilical cord, whether it's militarily, financially, politically. We see this time and again, the United Nations and the Security Council everywhere. And to say that we don't really have leverage, for instance, we've heard this in the past few days. We don't leverage. We pay them $4 or $5 billion, whatever it is, the dollars a year, and so on. We sustain them, we protect them, we send our Navy to protect them, we supply them with guns and so on. But we don't know how to leverage that. So that is completely disingenuous. But I bring this point just to say that their policy is consistent. Their policy has always been consistent. I met my wife during the siege of Beirut. She was a doctor in Beirut in 1982, and the hospital where she was bombed. She was there, and she survived by miracle. But the other people, her colleagues, did not. So this is an old story. This is not a new story. And the Israelis at the time came out and said, well, there were PLO people. They didn't say Hamas was not around at the time. These are PLO people. So that's an old story. American justification is an old story. These arms that we saw bomb Beirut and destroy it, much like they did much to Beirut as they do in Gaza. So all these things come together to basically state a U.S. policy that is historical, that is not something new. It's become, more and more shameless with every passing day, but then because it becomes normalized, what we have seen. But really, the essence of the policy, it does not change. It is no different than what they did in Cambodia or Laos or Vietnam or many other, or Iraq, of course, or Afghanistan, or what they do in Syria from time to time. So, this is really a consistent policy for a hyper-imperial power.
No, that's very, very true. And we always have to go back to remembering that. I think it's easy to sort of get stuck in these moments where you just get boiling with anger. I just can't imagine spending my days going to defend genocide and call it anything other than what it is. Especially that baby clip. I want to show just a couple other short clips here of you bringing it mostly to Matt Miller. I think that's who you end up dealing with the most, or there's another spokesperson you have back and forths with quite often. But this one in particular, specifically, I just want to play this one because it's, there's been so many horrors taking place all the time, but there's a couple that have just been so uniquely horrific. And one was the babies that were their bodies decomposed and the Israelis let them starve. And then the other one is what they did to Al-Shifa Hospital. It's just shocking what they did to Al-Shifa Hospital for, weeks and weeks. It was insane to watch the biggest hospital in all of Gaza be put under siege as though it was like some sort of military zone. And so here you are asking, once again, Matt Miller about this. So let's see what he had to say.
Can I follow up on this one, please?
I was just Matt, yeah, go ahead.
Now, you speak with certainty that Hamas is using a Shifa hospital as a.
I did not speak to Al Shifa, and I said I said hospitals. Just to be clear, Said.
About the Shifa hospital.
Yeah.
You know for certain the United States of America, the intelligence community knows for certain that Hamas is using that as a command.
So I'm going to use my own words because you just misstated what I said.
I'm not.
No. Let me just. You did. So let me be clear. What I said. I am not going to comment on any specific hospital. To do so would require me to get into intelligence matters, which I'm not going to do from the podium. I will say, as a general matter, yes, we do know that Hamas uses hospitals,
Right.
And there is plenty of public reporting about this. You can read about it in the press, using hospitals as command centers.
Okay, let me rephrase my question. Does the United States have any evidence that Hamas is using this particular hospital or the other hospital as command posts?
With respect to a general matter, I will say yes, we do. With respect to a specific hospital, I'm not going to get into intelligence matters.
But all the hospitals are completely out of service right now. So let me just, if you indulge me, a few more questions on this particular issue. Okay.
Yeah.
On this very issue. So why don't you rely? I mean, as there are Norwegian doctors that served in that hospital that came out and said, foreign European doctors and say this is nonsense. There's no command post and so on. Why don't you send them, a commission or the Red Cross or ask anyone to go and see, because that's what they said. Come and see it and see if it's being used as a command post. Why don't you do that?
I think
that would
So I would just say we feel fairly confident in the judgment we passed. We would welcome truly independent observers going. I think that's a little unrealistic to ask for in the middle of a conflict.
they are willing to do that.
I think we have seen Hamas at times break its.
I mean, again, your composure is amazing. Your composure in all of that is amazing. What is incredible to me is the way that he's able to say, oh yeah, we have evidence. I just can't show it to you. I can't show it to you. It's incredible. We have evidence that it's okay to bomb this hospital, but we can't show you the evidence. Are you joking? I mean, I don't know if you have any general thoughts about that, but yes. I'd like to hear that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead,
look, none other than Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel, who came out on CNN with Christiane Amanpour and said, listen, we built this bunker and it was just an extension of the hospital to accommodate other operating room and so on. He said, we built it in the early 80s because the Shifa hospital was getting too small to accommodate so many Gazans and so on. So they came and they said, look, there's nothing. Of course, I don't want to go into what they showed as evidence, whether it's a rotational calendar in Arabic, which they didn't even bother to read. You would think after bombing so many Arab countries, they would have some decent Arabic translators and so on. Literally, the evidence that they showed was an Arabic, this doctor so-and-so writing in the handwriting, he comes in at 6 o'clock and so on. This was a calendar. They're saying that these are the Hamas fighters. They're signing in as if you clock in when you come in, for being Hamas. They showed, right, exactly.
Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
They showed a couple of guns, a couple of rifles. In fact, both myself and Matt Lee from Associated Press, we said, look, in hospitals, in many hospitals throughout the world, in this country, you have armed guards. Maybe this is one of the armed guards, but of course they refused to accept it. The fact is, Rania, they showed no evidence. There was not a shred of evidence. There's not a shred of evidence now. There was none then or before that. That Hamas fighters have ever used this for the purposes that they say they used it. You probably at one time or another, you have a Hamas member going to the hospital. They get sick. They have, their kids, they have probably their wives gave birth there or something. We don't know. But to use it as a command and control, and that's what my point was. You have evidence that it was used as command and control. And of course, they don't have the evidence. They've never had the evidence. I mean, Israel targets these hospitals because they want to destroy all aspects of life that makes a place livable. That's what they want. They want to make Gaza
Mm-hmm.
unlivable. So you go after the hospitals, go after the schools, go after the clinic, uproot the olive trees, uproot the lemon trees, destroy the roads, and so on. So this is systematic. This is systematic destruction because there is only one intent, and that intent is to make Gaza unlivable. Although I mean, in terms of being crowded, in terms of unsanitary waters and so on. This was before the war. The United Nations said that Gaza was unlivable. So now they want to destroy any semblance or any effort at reassuming some sort of a life for Gazans. So that is the intent, and that's what the United States defends day in and day out. They have always accused Hamas of hiding in these buildings. They never produced anyone. To date, it's 104 days since this war began. We have not seen a single captured Hamas person that Israel can produce. We have not seen, anything that they can point out. They pointed to some sort of a milling shop where Hamas was apparently making some rifles or something like this. We don't know how authentic that is. We don't know how they showed us some of the tunnels we didn't see. So, all their claims really have fallen flat on their face. You mentioned something about in the beginning about the goals of Israel, the stated goals. And we know what these stated goals are. They said that they want to decapitate Hamas. They have not. They said that they want to hunt their leadership in field. We're not talking, of course, they assassinated Saleh Haruri in Beirut, but in field, they have not been able to do that. They have not captured Sinwar. They have not captured the military leaders of Hamas. They have not been able to change the regime as they wanted, as once they called it. So it has failed completely. I mean, it's sad for them that after this whole war is over, Hamas will still be there, both politically and militarily. And what you have a total destruction, a total catastrophe that will continue to sort of inflict Gaza for maybe decades to come.
Of course. I mean, yeah, I don't know. This is not going to be an easy way whatsoever. And of course, I mean, before you, I mean, just consider all of the kids who are going to have developmental issues because they're being starved right now at like crucial ages. They're being starved, and their bodies are it's going to affect their bodies for the rest of their lives. That's like one of so many problems to come. But I want to ask you about the other journalists in the room. It's always you and maybe like one or two other people, like Matt Lee. You mentioned Matt Lee. He's a regular, does challenging questions. And every once in a while, you'll hear a question that's a little bit challenging, but it's not common. What is wrong with everyone else? Like, they must, I mean, this is, usually I understand like all these corporate media correspondents go along with the official line. But do they just have the same attitude? I know you don't know what's in these people's hearts, but what do you suspect it is? Is it just that they are all a bunch of imperialists who agree with the administration? Do you think some of this is self-censorship? What's going on here? Why are you the only voice who's consistently holding these people's feet to the fire?
Rania, first of all, I must admit that since this Gaza war, really, it's not just me. I mean, there are all the other journalists, my colleagues, whether from Reuters or AFP or the print media, they always ask tough questions with varying degrees. They do have their priorities, as you mentioned. It's corporate media, so their priorities are well stated. But they do ask professional questions and so on. I mean, from time to time, you have a wacky question coming out, probably from the right-wing media or something like this. But the mainstream media has always been not on point, if you or its eyes not on the ball as far as issues that pertain to the Palestinians are concerned. I mean, we've also seen it in other places. For instance, on Ukraine. There is almost everybody reads off the same kind of fact sheet and so on. But with the Palestinian, because it is so enormous, I mean, you cannot just gloss over this tragedy. I must say that my colleagues have been So, and I don't want to say supportive. They're doing their job, because that's the kind of question that everybody should be asking. It's being done by their country, by their government, in support of a foreign government that is brutally carrying out a genocide. Nobody should stand for that. But by and large, they do. With not maybe as with the same kind of intensity that I do, or sometimes Matt, as you mentioned, Matt Lee, and others. But to their credit, my colleagues, most of them, ask proper questions.
Well, you are so polite,
Right.
and you're also in the room with them. So I guess maybe you feel a certain sentiment among the people in the room. I mean, do you feel like, as opposed to other times in the past, that at this point there is frustration among the press corps when it comes to what these spokespeople are saying?
I think that the fact that we begin almost every briefing, for the past 104 days with Gaza, and the fact that it goes from one person to another and so on, and they're asking the question, it has garnered the kind of I don't want to say spotlight, but the level of importance that drives these journalists to ask the questions. It doesn't matter the content of the question, but it always the question leads to something else and to other questions, and it makes the spokesperson either slip or say something he didn't want to say or she did not want to say, and so on. So there has been focus, and that focus is very important to remain. In the State Department, for sure, it has garnered a great deal of the oxygen in the past 104 days, and so on. So that by itself creates its own dynamic. So the issue remains, not only in focus, but also, they are being spotlighted as to what they do, what they say, and what they don't say.
Yeah, that's a good. I mean, that's interesting, because that, you wouldn't have said the same probably about the situation with Ukraine, or the war in Ukraine, which was very much, everybody was on mostly one side, very lacking in nuance and accepting whatever the State Department says. And you got to think at some point, if you're Matt Miller or like John Kirby, you got to think sometimes when they're saying what they have to say up on that podium, they're sitting there in their heads knowing someone's going to do a split screen of what they said about Ukraine versus what they said about Gaza. And they're like preemptively got to be embarrassed.
Yes, absolutely.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear the rest, you can access it by becoming a Breakthrough News member at patreon.com/breakthrough news.